Looks like we're cooking with gas. Thanks, Sam. So today is the 31st. Last day of January. And you can hear me okay in Olean and Dunkirk?
Yes, sir.
So I had a little problem this morning, but I'm still not even sure why. So any questions, comments, concerns before I go ahead? I think we might be focused up. Okay, so today I'm going to give you your first written assignment that will be due a week from today. So let me put it up on the camera and then we'll talk about it. And I would ask you to write the assignment down from the camera. Or some people like to take pictures, that's fine. Let me just get it a little bigger. Can we see this okay every place? So this will be due a week from today. For my friends in Jamestown, you could just hand it to me. For my friends in Dunkirk and Olean, you can either send it directly to my email address as an attachment, and my email address is on the syllabus, or you can go to, in the case of Dunkirk, go to the business office, or Olean, go over, see Emily in the tech building. She can scan and send it to me. So either one is perfectly okay. It says in a 3-page double-spaced type essay, using class lectures, readings, and discussion, answer the above question: what is Palestine? Who are the Palestinians? Being sure to identify any and all sources. These do not have to be elaborate source notes. If you use one of the books or one of the readings, just like if you do The Last Earth, you could just put The Last Earth or History of the Modern. At least you don't have to get terribly elaborate. Obviously, if it's your notes, you don't have to reference that. If you use a source other than anything we've done in class, like you could use the article, which I'm still trying to figure out if I can get it to you, the one about from the National Geographic. You can just say, notes from the presentation in class. So your notes, your source notes, you could practice something if you're using it for another class. I'm not particularly picky. I just want to know where you might be getting your stuff from. Conclude your discussion by describing how what you learned in our short time together is different from what you knew coming into the class. So I don't know what you knew, if you knew anything about Palestine. If you didn't know anything or you didn't know much, that's perfectly okay. If you think, you had some ideas about Palestine, then please tell me about that. Finally, I want you, as part of this assignment, to ask one question you would like to know more about as a result of learning what you did in our class. So I want you to formulate a question.
And that can be right in the essay at the very end?
Yeah, at the end of the essay, just as part of your essay, write the question.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be fine. And as per the syllabus, I'll be checking writing, spelling structure, yeah, writing, spelling, sentence structure, punctuation. And it'll be due a week from today. And then I also use this for purposes of the progress grades, and then as a way of preparing us to go into the simulations by having an understanding of what Palestine is. And what you choose to highlight as to what you know from what we've talked about, I leave that up to you. Because we've had a fair amount of stuff, but certainly, Palestine and the Palestinians are complex. But basically, I've been attempting to answer those questions. So now I want you to answer what your understanding is. And of course, what you thought about Palestine or Palestinians before you came to that is going to vary from person to person, depending on what you knew or perhaps didn't know. And maybe our class so far has added to your understanding, changed your understanding. That's the more personal part. So, would anybody like to ask a swell question?
Question.
Sure.
Are we to be writing formally or informally? Use I, you.
When you say formally, informally, I'm sorry, what was your question? Oh, you mean like, can you use the first person?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, normally with formal academic writing, and certainly with the simulation, I'll ask you not to do that. But because this is your own personal reflection on what you knew and what you learned, it's perfectly okay with me. If you want to use, be personal and say I and me. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm hoping that this will be, very personal to you. Because, if I were to write this, certainly it's interesting what I thought I knew before I started doing all this. And certainly in the course of a couple of years, my understanding has changed dramatically. But I've been doing this for a couple of years. We've only been doing it for 3 weeks. Anybody else have a swell question? You think we might be all right? Yes, ma'am.
If we've done further research than just the reading, can we include that as well?
Sure.
Okay.
Just if you did that, then let me know where you got the information from, wherever it came from. Because I'd be interested to see what you might be looking at if you did additional stuff. Because there is more and more stuff out there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's people or scholars who this is all they do. Well, I try to take advantage of because given where I'm working, I can't do that. But some people get the luxury of doing that, but that would be great. Yes.
And you said you don't need a formal citations page, just a
No.
separate page with links and an article title.
Yeah, and you can either put it at the bottom of the page, at the end of the writing, in the body of the work.
Okay.
If you're practicing a particular source style for another class or one that you're really comfortable with, please do that. As long as I know where you're getting your stuff from. Not particularly picky about it. And on some other classes, they might be. And this is meant to be just an attempt to get you writing about this, and then I'm really curious as to what. It'll be interesting to me to see what you thought you knew, and there's a lot here. So what you'll highlight in terms of what you think you learned. Certainly, hopefully, already in 3 weeks you learned something. Otherwise, I'll be really depressed. Have to go to the sanitarium or something. That's my bad joke. Anybody else have a small question? And again, if you want the simulation packet, feel free to send me an email and request it. I'm assuming when you got it, it was okay. Did you at least click on it, see if it was?
Let me make sure. I didn't check my email.
Because I downloaded it and then, I put it in my Word file and then sent it off. So
through email?
yeah, I sent it to your email address. Didn't you send me a message saying thank you? Wasn't that you or my hallucinating?
It might have been maybe a different student.
That was probably.
Oh, maybe it was you?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I thought it was you.
No, I meant to send you an email, but I didn't have it.
I'm in bad shape. Yeah. But I'm assuming so. Cassandra, you sent it to me or asked for it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm
Did you
just
check to
remembering
see if
now.
it came through okay? Sorry, I don't know why. Got it in my head that it was you.
No, I know I asked about it, I just didn't.
Oh, maybe that's why, because you did ask about it.
Yeah.
So I'm not completely insane.
Yeah, it came through.
Okay, cool. Any other questions or comments? Everybody thinks they're okay, especially with the assignment? Okay, so we spent some time with that article talking about what Palestine is and who the Palestinians are. And then that peace plan proposed by the president, I've been so busy this week. Normally, for my source, I like to use the New York Times, and I caught a discussion on TV the other night. So the whole thing is not particularly clear to me, but there's time for that. And God knows if it's going to go anyplace. It's probably dead on arrival already, but that's another issue. I know that the Palestinians are objecting to the whole thing already, which is what I would expect it. But they're badly divided. One of the things the Israeli government seems to be united, although you should keep in mind that there's another Israeli national election in early March, which may or may not change things, whereas the Palestinians are divided between the occupants of the West Bank and the legitimate authority of Palestinian Authority. So what I wanted to do this morning was, I'm going to take this down and focus on this map. It's a little shiny. I'm going to see if I can flatten it out. Probably may not work out as well as I would like. I'll give it a chance. So I have another one, but
Is there a way to turn off the light on the
Yeah.
camera?
I think if we turn,
I can turn this one off.
yeah, see if that gets rid of some of the glare, doesn't it? But very strange. I think maybe because of the folds in the map and the print.
I think it's because of the light on the camera.
Oh, yeah, you're right. And if I turn that off, then we're screwed. I don't think there's anything I can do about that. You're right, it's,
Maybe if we turn on the regular lights and turn that one off.
no, well, because if I turn this off, then it doesn't go to the other sides. So maybe I need to get a different map, because this is not bad, but yeah, that light's washing it out. Unless I leave the camera on the top and try, I know what I do. Let's see, let's just screw it up. Yeah, well, that was a nice idea. Let me see if I can, let's see what happens if I, probably would be the same thing if I try to show Jerusalem. Actually, Jerusalem, why does that show up okay? What is okay?
Maybe you could try zooming out.
At one point it was pretty good, and then I seem to have screwed it up. That doesn't help either. I think what I'm gonna have to do to make this work is do a black and white copy, because this paper is shiny. And I think that's what's causing the problem. So, let me go make a copy of this and I'll come back. Don't go away. You can talk among yourselves. You can discuss your essay. Oh, well.
How far have you guys gotten in the readings? Like maybe 2 chapters in this one book.
I've done one and like half a one.
I've done like 2 pages.
I feel like the book, the chapter book, is not that easy to read.
But modern little easy.
No, this one.
It's definitely easier, but
Yeah, but it's still like,
yeah.
so, just separate Spotify.
Yeah.
Well, if you do, that's what I looked up. I looked up a podcast. Search I got a podcast episode. I was like, shortly explain it.
I found a good video on YouTube. It's like YouTube, like thing is called Jubilee, and it's like their videos are finding middle ground, and there's a video where Palestinians and Israelis like get together and like talk, I guess. It's pretty interesting. to hear
Yeah,
both
if you find any
sides.
good YouTube videos you think would be worth for the class to see, let me know.
Yeah, I can email you a link or something.
Oh, okay.
Helpful.
Yeah. That would be fantastic. So, I made a black and white copy here. So, now we can look at it. And I have political maps, and actually up in my office, I have a color relief map that I bought when I was over there. But I don't even know how well that would show up on the camera. So, let me see this a little more. I think we can get the key stuff in here, which is what I wanted to do. And if I just back up and then I'm gonna go into it. But if you haven't paid much attention to that part of the world, you can see this map does not say anything about Palestine. It obviously says Israel. And then there's Lebanon, that's the Mediterranean Sea. To the right of Lebanon is Syria. You can't see that. Then you got Jordan, and then this is Egypt. So I want to zoom in on this because Palestine is divided between the Gaza Strip, which is a very little tiny strip right here on the Mediterranean Sea, right next to Egypt. And I think, as far as I know, because I don't think anyone's done a real census there, there's about 2 million people pushed into that tiny little strip. And then the greater bulk of Palestine is what's called the West Bank, because it's the west bank of the Jordan River, hence the name. And this is coming up because when I saw the brief program on the supposed proposal of a peace plan from the United States, although the Palestinians had boycotted the discussion, I was really shocked to find out because these two are separated by Israel. If they're going to become their own independent nation state, then how do you connect the two? And that short program I saw on the peace proposal talked about building an underground tunnel from the Gaza Strip into the West Bank, which has got to be expensive. But instead of building a highway, maybe with walls, they're going to build an underground tunnel. But then is that tunnel part of Palestine or is it part of Israel? And the tunnel would link the West Bank with the Gaza Strip, but couldn't the Israelis at any time shut it down? So it seemed rather strange, but they were trying to connect coastal Palestine with interior Palestine.
Now, why do they have to be connected? Because, like, what's the difference between the United States and, like, Alaska or Hawaii? Why can't it just be like a territory kind of thing? Yeah.
Well, obviously, in the case of the United States, Alaska is in North America, but it's not contiguous to the United States. British Columbia and Canada gets in between. But when you say why, well, I guess the difference, well, you got a good point. I mean, if you go to Alaska, you either have to go by sea or air or drive through Canada. I suspect, and I don't know this, but I suspect that because remember we talked about how you have two different license plates and you have to go through checkpoints and walls. I suspect the reason for the tunnel would allow them to be connected so there'd be one Palestine. But the Israelis do not want a Palestinian highway cutting through their territory. And I would assume they're going to say it's because of security concerns. Because what would stop Palestine from sending people with weapons down to attack Israel unless you build walls? So if you ask why do they have to be connected, there's got to be some way for people to go back and forth with ease. And because of the long history of the region, I'm not sure it would work out the way it would with us and Alaska, because keep in mind that the United States and Canada have good relations.
Right.
Palestine and Israel do not,
Mhm.
and there's a history of violence back and forth.
Mhm.
And so I think it's that history of violence, the security concerns on the part of the Israelis, which, you know, you could travel through British Columbia to get to Alaska, but, you know, it's a country that we're at peace with and that we haven't been at war with since the War of 1812, like more than 200 years ago. I think it's partially because of history.
Okay.
I would suspect, whereas this is a long history. And a lot of the violence comes out of the Gaza Strip because you have 2 million people in this tiny little area, and they do not have freedom of movement to either Egypt or Israel proper, and they certainly do not have freedom of movement to the West Bank. I've never been in the Gaza Strip because it's simply too dangerous. And most Palestinian scholars, even if they're Palestinian people, have never been there. But because it's on the sea, that allowed Palestinians to fish in the Mediterranean Sea, although for the most part the Israeli government prohibits that, which is kind of crazy because it's a source of food. And then you can see there's a city there called Gaza that my understanding is that's where the word gauze comes from that we use in English. It's originally an Arabic word. And you can see there's a little description there. It might be hard to read, but it says occupied by Israel since '67. It's talking about the West Bank and Gaza Strip. These territories, gray, contain some 3 million people, and 93% are Palestinian. So I've never been in the Gaza now. I've been in the West Bank. The other thing I want to point out is that comes up all the time up here. Might be hard to see, but it's called the Golan Heights. It's called the Golan Heights because it's elevated. There are hills and mountains when you go into the interior, and right at the Golan Heights is the highest point, and probably can't see that too well. That's hard to see, but the Golan Heights borders on Syria and borders on Lebanon. The Israeli government has seized the Golan Heights, which is not part of the West Bank, and their justification for that is that Syria, and they've got a point, that Syria has been one of the countries pledged, probably with the help of Iran, to destroy Israel. And so Israel says, well, we need the Golan Heights because it's elevated and we can keep an eye on what's going on in Syria. And international law actually has said that that's illegal, but the United States has supported the Israelis, and the Israelis claim it's one of the things they have to do to protect themselves from an attack by the Syrians. There's actually some legitimate point to that. Although in this day and age, with the ability to do surveillance, does being on a hill really matter anymore? Well, I guess it does, and certainly whether it really does or not does give a sense of security, and they do worry about Syria, and rightly so. Syria is locked in the civil war. The government of Syria is backed by the Russians, and the Israelis are worried about the civil war spilling into Israel, or Syria, or Iran, or somebody else using Syria as a base to attack. So by controlling the Golan Heights, they have a defense capability there. And so what typically happens when discussing Israel and Palestine, 3 things constantly come up: the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. The Gaza Strip and the West Bank are Palestine occupied by the Israelis. The Golan Heights is, does that belong to Israel, Lebanon, or Syria? That is disputed, but the Israeli government has control with the Israeli Defense Forces and basically said we're not giving it up because it's the only way to protect ourselves from an attack from Syria. So those are the three areas that you'll constantly hear about: Gaza Strip, Golan Heights, and the West Bank. Now, the West Bank is typically understood to be the heart and soul of Palestine for a couple of reasons. One is it's hard to see, but where my finger is, that's Jerusalem. And we have the little detailed map of Jerusalem right here without the color I can bring up. Now, you might remember that President Trump moved the American embassy from Tel Aviv into Jerusalem. The Israelis claim Jerusalem as their capital because of King David's original temple, and the Palestinians claim that Palestine is also their capital. I think the current peace plan says that Jerusalem will be part of Israel. Most plans have called for Jerusalem to be an international city. And I heard this discussion that said, well, under the president's peace plan, the Palestinians won't have their capital in Jerusalem, but we're going to put it in a suburb. I don't think that's going to fly. It's kind of a strange argument. So in fact, well, that's, let me go back. I don't want to make you guys dizzy. The Palestinian Authority, really hard to see, but it's in Ramallah, which is right there. It's not far from Jerusalem. There's Jerusalem. There's Ramallah. Ramallah is the capital. Well, if you will, they don't use that term, but it's where the Palestinian Authority is headquartered. It's also where the Palestinian Museum is, which we didn't get a chance to spend enough time in there because it's actually quite interesting. It tells the Palestinian story from the Palestinian perspective in a beautiful museum. And then Yasser Arafat, a name that you might have heard about, who was the leader of the Palestinians, has a mausoleum, and he's buried in quite a lovely setting with guards from the Palestinian Authority, even though they're technically not soldiers. But you'll notice it's not a very long trip from Jerusalem to Ramallah, but to get to Ramallah, you have to go through a checkpoint because there's a wall. And so even as an American, I had to go through the checkpoint. Everybody does. One time I had to go there on my own with two other colleagues to interview somebody in Ramallah, and I started not to feel bad, so I had to go back. And I went through the checkpoint, and then there's this mad dash for the buses that'll take you to Jerusalem. I paid for a cab because I didn't want to get that mad dash. And then my colleagues who came back later got held up at the border for several hours and were stuck in the room with everybody else. And if you ask the Israeli government what's going on, they get annoyed and they won't answer. So these are very small territories. Just to go back to Jerusalem, which both sides claim as theirs. And then, of course, you got the religious split. So you can see East Jerusalem up on top there. And you can see Al-Quds, University Al-Quds, again, meaning just the Palestinian or Arabic word. For Jerusalem, it just means the holy city. And the walled-in city is really quite small, but that's the ancient city going way back. And when you look at the map, there's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is very sacred to Christians because that's allegedly where Jesus was crucified. And this map could be a little better. But over here is the Dome of the Rock. That's the holy mosque where, as I mentioned to you before, Muhammad allegedly rose up to heaven on his white horse. And then it's not the best one, but this is a relatively small area. I stayed with my colleagues in a hotel right near here, which is the Damascus Gate. And then you have to walk into the old city. The Via Dolorosa is supposedly the route of Jesus Christ on his way to being crucified. And then you can see the city is divided between a Jewish section, a Christian section, and a Muslim section. And sometimes if you go into the Muslim section and they know you're not Muslim, the Israeli Defense Forces get really nervous. So the Israeli Defense Forces, which is young people with machine guns, there's usually about 6 of them right here at the Damascus Gate. Then I didn't really go to the Jaffa Gate, but there's usually 6 of them there. Then there's 6 over at the St. Stephen's Gate, 6 at the Dun Gate, and then there's a separate set of IDF in this little area because you have 2 mosques in there. And I could get in with my passport, but if you were Muslim, you had to apply for a permit to go in there. And I'm not Muslim, but I could go in there freely. So all Muslims agree that that's where Muhammad ascended into heaven on his white horse. That's where the cave is built into it, like we talked about with houses. And then when you talk to the Christians at St. Stephen's Gate, they will point to 3 different spots where allegedly Jesus ascended into heaven. So the Christians can't agree. I don't know why. They all agree that this is where he was crucified, but they can't agree where he ascended. So apparently there is a Catholic version, a Lutheran version, and a Greek Orthodox version, and they will point to the hill and say, well, that's where the Catholics said he went up, that's where the Orthodox said he went up, and that's where the Lutherans said he went up. So it's both fascinating and strange at times. And then West Jerusalem is the very nice part where we didn't spend a whole lot of time in because we were staying at the hotel right near the Damascus Gate in East Jerusalem. It's a relatively compact area. And then if we go to the map of Israel again, there's the Dead Sea. Can't see it, but it's quite large, although the water is undrinkable because it's salt water. That's the place where I talked about how you can lay back and float. You know, at first I was afraid to do it, but you lay back and the water holds you up because it's so salty. And then if you look at this map, and this map is a challenge. There's Jerusalem and there's Bethlehem, where Jesus was allegedly born. So it's a relatively short trip, but when you see this heavy border, it usually indicates not only the border, but the wall. So in order to go to Bethlehem, we had to go through the checkpoint again. Soldier gun out with machine guns. And then we went to see where Jesus was born. Which is interesting was that there was mostly Indian tourists there waiting in line for hours to go down where it's very warm and touch the spot where Jesus allegedly was born in a cave-like structure, which when we were talking about how Palestinians lived, that's not unusual, and that wasn't necessarily a bad thing because the caves gave you protection. And if you had a cave, it was part of your house, and so you could go down. We were able to skip the line and go down there, but it was boiling hot. I couldn't wait to get out of there. And I'm claustrophobic, so that didn't help. And then up here, Nablus, that's the city that's noted for the olive oil soap. It's a little bit of a trip, but not much. And then the most depressing place is Hebron, which is down here. Hebron has a long and scary history. That's the place where when I went up the steps to the grave, supposedly of Abraham, the guard was chasing after me with a machine gun, asking me if I was Muslim. And I stupidly wouldn't tell him. I suppose I could have gotten shot, but oh well, luckily I didn't. So it's a relatively short amount of territory, and I think in terms of what will come up with the peace plan or the history is the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, Nablus, Ramallah, Jerusalem, and Hebron. And then over here is Tel Aviv, where you land at the airport, and then we took a van ride into Jerusalem. And then over here is Nazareth, for those of you who are biblically oriented. It's outside of the West Bank. And then there's a crossing point across the Jordan River into Jordan, which is right next door. Jordan has a kingdom, and Jordan tries to stay neutral as best as it can. They are an American ally. You can see it's quite large. Amman is the capital, which is not too far from the West Bank. And then up here is the capital, Syria, which is, Damascus. And then to the right, that's cut off, this is Saudi Arabia. And I was trying to see if I have the scale. I might have it on here, because this is really a small area. Actually, my thumb is about 25 miles, the width of my thumb. So, from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv might be 35, 40 miles. It's not far. So this is a pretty small place, which is rich in history and religion, and unfortunately still locked in conflict. So as we start to discuss this more and more, and we start to look at the history, it really is helpful to have, I think, some sense of the geography. And I had experience with Bethlehem, Ramallah, Jerusalem, Nablus, and the most depressing one, Hebron. When I was there studying, President Trump was coming to Jerusalem, and we were supposed to go someplace on an excursion, and we were very fearful that because of the heightened security, we would not be able to get back in that night. So we actually had to move everything we had up to Ramallah, and then go to the Dead Sea, and then wait for him to be gone so that we could get back into the city. So we had to change our plans because the security was super tight when he was there. And, fortunately nothing happened. And then the one day we took the trip down to Hebron where I had the problem, but that's a very sad city. Normally, if you get a bunch of academics together, we can't shut them up. And after we went into Hebron, starting with that situation where I was being chased up the steps by the guy with the machine gun, it was the only time during the whole trip that on the way back to Jerusalem, nobody said a word, because Hebron was so depressing. What you have happening in the West Bank is a series of, and there are maps of this, but a series of illegal settlements by the Israeli government all over the place, whereby it's 2020, they're continuing to take land away from the Palestinians, building these new settlements guarded by the Israeli Defense Forces. And in places like Hebron, they build the settlements on top of the existing Palestinian apartments. So you might have 2-3 floors of Palestinians, and then on the top you have 2 floors of settlers, many of whom, as Jews, are exercising the right to return literally from all over the world. That wouldn't be the worst problem, though. International law says those settlements are completely and totally illegal. The United States backs them up. The European Union tries to help the Palestinians by investing in the Palestinian sites, but they often get destroyed. So the European Union is the #1 investor in Palestine. You may know that President Trump has, I forgot when, but he completely cut off all funding to the Palestinians. The European Union, to a great extent, has stepped in to take the place. But Hebron is particularly depressing because when we went in there and we got through the checkpoint, all the streets, which are very narrow, you just walk, there's no vehicles on them. They all had netting over them because the settlers continuously throw rocks, feces, and urine on anybody who walks through there. And so the day we were there, a Muslim family invited us upstairs to see their home. And we went there, the settlers saw that, they didn't like it, they called the defense forces. So 6 guys with machine guns come down saying, what are you doing up there? And then said, well, don't go back the way you came because we refuse to protect you. And they're getting ready to throw rocks, feces, and urine. So we went the long way, and that's what got us so depressed. And this was just a couple of years ago. So the settlers aren't very nice to the Palestinians, and the Israeli Defense Forces refuse to protect the Palestinians or people like us with our American passports who were visiting. You can't help but come out of there depressed. So I wanted to give some lay of the land with the geography because that's important. And then we can do some more with the history and the article. But I'm starting to run out of time already. So the assignment again will be due a week from today. I'll ask you on Monday and Wednesday if you have any questions. Then if more of you can request the simulation packet, because then very quickly, probably next week, somebody has to volunteer to be the head of the delegation. President Abbas, I think, is still head of the Palestinian Authority, which runs the West Bank because the Israelis let them. So some Palestinians think that the Palestinian Authority is a sellout. Gaza Strip, by the way, is controlled by Hamas, which is understood by the United States and Israel to be a terrorist group, and Hamas is funded by Iran. So the Hezbollah in Iran fund the Hamas in Gaza, and Gaza periodically breaks out in violence, diseases. It's very poor, high unemployment rate. Palestine, when you look at the history, Israel has always been pretty united. They've had their fights, and they still do, but they're adamant about their Jewish state in the land called Judea and Samaria, because they don't use things like West Bank. Palestinians are badly divided, and President Abbas, who's elected head of the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, and the Hamas group in Gaza, they don't get along because Hamas could be considered to be a terrorist group funded by Hezbollah in Iran. And Iran clearly is not a friend of Israel. There is no doubt about it. The Islamic Republic of Iran still calls for death to Israel and death to the United States. Those security concerns are, I would argue, quite legitimate. But Israel has nuclear weapons, Iran currently does not. So start working on the assignment, request the simulation packet, think about who wants to be President Abbas, and think about who wants to be the economics minister, the environment minister, the human rights minister, so we can get started on that. And then if you have those links to YouTube videos that you thought were helpful, just send them along, and then we'll proceed from there. Swell. If you have questions, I'm still going to be taking things apart, so feel free.
I did send you the video and an email asking for simulation.
Okay, cool. I might not respond till tomorrow, I don't know, because the rest of the day's all messed up.
That's okay.
Got 2 meetings off campus. So, I think I'm going to clean my oven this week. Pretty excited. Oh, that's interesting. I'm sideways.
Have a good weekend.
You too.